Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thank you so much for being here. We got to talk about the Supreme Court, the big Texas Supreme Court case that we've been talking about the last week or so. The Supreme Court refused to hear it. All the lawsuits these last few weeks have come down to this one. Texas sued Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia directly. This was for all the marbles. And the court denied even hearing the case. They said that Texas lacked standing to sue. Now, I'll explain that in a second, but Alito and Thomas, they disagreed. It was very short, not like 2-paragraph little thing. And one of those sentences was this one about Alito and Thomas. In my view, we do not have discretion to deny the filing of a bill of complaint in a case that falls within our own original jurisdiction. We'll explain that in a second. I would therefore grant the motion to file the bill of complaint, but would not grant other relief, and I express no view on any other issue. So original jurisdiction. So the Constitution says, Article 3, that in all cases regarding ambassadors and when states sue each other, it goes right to the Supreme Court. It doesn't go through the normal process up the levels of courts, right? So like if I sue the state, then it goes through all the different layers of the court system and then maybe gets to the Supreme Court at the end. But if a state, Texas, sues Pennsylvania, then the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction and hears it straight away. So that's Alito and Thomas saying, hey guys, we have to at least hear the case. We're the only people who can hear it. We have to hear it. It's original jurisdiction. It's right in the Constitution. But they didn't say anything about the merits of the case itself. The other justices, the 7 of the 9, said, we're not even going to hear it because Texas doesn't have standing. So standing is you have to prove that three things. You have to prove you were harmed by the law. Or in this case, Texas has to prove that they were harmed by the breaking of law in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Georgia. So you have to prove that you were harmed. You have to prove that it was that law that harmed me. So you can't just be like, oh, I'm a victim, right? So that law. And you have to prove that a favorable decision would make it all better, right? So in legal terms, it's called injury in fact, causation, and redressability. Those are the three. So like Roe v. Wade, for instance, the pro-abortion people, they needed to find a woman who was pregnant, who couldn't get an abortion because of Texas law, prove it was that law that harmed this woman, and then prove that overturning the law could help the woman, right? It can't just be some random guy suing because he doesn't like a law, right? The person has to have standing. And the court said that Texas doesn't have standing to sue other states. Now, Texas's argument was we have standing because the laws were so violated in these other states, it affected the Electoral College outcome, which therefore affects the people of Texas negatively. And the other states said, butt out of our business. And Texas said, well, what goes on in your state when it comes to the presidential election is our business. And the Supreme Court said, no, it's not. And that's it. I'm disappointed. It's a bummer. I would have, and this was my point all along. Last time we talked about this, I said the court must take the case. I think I put that on Facebook or something, and people were all like, oh, you're an idiot, Slater, blah, 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 blah. And then they started going through the merits of the case. And I was like, no. I'm not, I have talked about that before, but in this moment, I said that they have to take it. I didn't say what they have to decide. I just said they have to take the case and then rule on it one way or the other. And that was Alito and Thomas's point. Take the case and then judge it on its merits. I would have been much more content with the Supreme Court saying, all right, Texas, we'll read your argument and here's what we think about it. And then just pulverize each and every argument if that's what they felt. Right? But give us something conclusive. Right? Not this, oh, you don't have standing, goodbye. I think this lacks some closure that people needed, and that really only the Supreme Court could provide, legally, at least. And this isn't just me from a conservative perspective either, right? I've read some progressives who felt, at least beforehand, the same way. Obviously, they were confident that they would win, so they were like, yeah, Supreme Court, you should take this case and then just crush them. Either way, it would just be more conclusive. Alas, no more legal challenges left. That's it. Today's the Electoral College is meeting, and that's what we're going to talk about coming up in the next segment. By the way, should be noted, all three of Trump's Supreme Court justices decided against hearing the case. So we had 4 years, and especially with Barrett at the end, 4 years of the left claiming that this is the end of the republic because of these three evil Trump judges, lackeys for Trump. Will they ever admit that the Supreme Court and these three justices in particular are fair people? Will the left ever admit that Trump's Supreme Court justices are decent and follow the law only, not Trump's bidding? Will they ever admit that? No. And the left will attack Trump's justices at the very second it suits them. Republican legislatures, you better tighten up your voting laws now. You are an absolute disgrace if this is not the very first thing you do when your next legislative session begins. If you ever want to win an election again, you must get on this now. Do not let the COVID election chaos become the norm, right? Whereas it's like Secretary of State could just be like, we're just gonna give everyone a ballot. Like, do not allow that anymore. Explicitly, do not allow that. We're just flood everyone with random ballots and see which ones make it back. That has to stop. Do not let that become the norm. As for us, it stings. Remember, when was it? I saw Jesse Kelly wrote this a while back. It was about something different. I forget what it was. And he was like, yeah, it sucks when you lose something. I don't think it was the election. It was before that. It stings, but what are you gonna do? Give up? Are you giving up? And don't fall for this. The left's pushing this, hey everyone, it's now time for calm and normalcy and unity and togetherness now that a Democrat's president. Don't buy that nonsense. Call him a Nazi for 4 straight years and lie about everything they say, and then impeach Biden, and then impeach Kamala when she takes over in a few months, right? No. Maybe we don't need to call them Nazis and 4 years of hashtag not my president and straight lying for 4 years. By the way, are there still kids in cages? Are there still kids in cages, or is Biden going to get rid of the kids in cages? Or was it Trump that got rid of the kids in cages? If there's still kids in cages, which there aren't, then you'd think that would be Biden's very first order of business would be to get rid of the kids in cages. But it was actually Obama and Biden who built the cages, and it was Trump who got rid of the kids in cages at the border. Will Biden bring them back then? We're not going to be like the left and loot and burn when things don't go our way. But we're never going to stop calling out their lies. And it's time to get on the offensive. They don't want unity. They want power. And part of getting you to submit is getting you to think that, oh, things are now normal. Things are calm. What's the problem, man? Relax. Man, the nation's it's healed. The nation's healed. We found our chi. No. And if I may, it's no longer just about politicians. For far too long, we've been tricked. I've been tricked into thinking that the power of this country is held between the people like Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell. And like, those are the people we didn't know. Those are just two clowns who use each other to fundraise off of each other and get reelected. The real power are the culture makers and our education systems. That's where our focus must now be. Obviously, we're gonna pay attention to politics during political season. I'm very ready to move on from that and focus on where I think our energy really needs to be placed. And obviously, we'll do plenty of that here together every day. No more on the defense. It's time for conservatives to get on the offense. The silent majority is not silent anymore. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of the silent majority. It's like a badge of honor. No more. The electors are meeting today. We'll get details on that coming up next with one of our favorite guests, Trent England. First, I see 2 different gold analyses. One is just like this big, just like this little tiny, right? The day-to-day where they see the stimulus coming and vaccines coming out and the stocks go up and gold goes down. And then there's a more medium-term analysis, which sees what I think is a more complete, full picture. And they see what the stimulus really means, right? And they see the decades of spending money that we don't have and printing money out of thin air just ramped in overdrive these last couple months. It's currency debasement. And so many people continue to ignore that at their and the nation's own peril. But that's what gold prices are most tied to. And a lower price now is a wonderful buying opportunity before the whole thing crashes. Did you see Bill Gates the other day? Said he thinks the next 4 to 6 months of the pandemic could be the worst. 4 to 6 months of all this lockdown nonsense. It's all building up to a collapse. And these politicians don't give a lick. So I bought gold and silver. Think about it. Do some research. Get some in your hands. Patriot Gold Group. They are the single best group to buy gold from. It was shockingly easy to buy gold. And they'll answer any questions you have. There's no pressure at all. They're not lacking buyers right now. So they're not desperate to sell. So I just want to make sure this is a good move for you. So give them a call. 1-800-798-4260. 1-800-798-4260. Or PatriotGoldGroup.com. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So we just talked about the end of the legal road for the president here. But today, the electors meet in the different state capitals. So let's talk about that process and what is still to come until January 20th. Trent England is here. He is the executive director of Save Our States and the guy behind this documentary. It's on Amazon for free if you have Amazon Prime, called Safeguard, an electoral college story, and you should definitely watch it. Trent, how are you, brother?
Hey, Mike, I'm doing great. How are you?
Man, really good to talk to you. So let's go through timelines. So what is happening today?
So today is the day that the electors meet in each state capital and actually cast their official votes for president and vice president. And in some places, it's, they'll have a kind of a highfalutin ceremony. Other places, it's sort of relatively informal. Typically, C-SPAN will carry a little bits and pieces of this. But it's a pretty straightforward, kind of very brief business meeting, basically.
Okay, and the elector, like physical people, literally go to the state capitals.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you have, and in some places, right, like in Wyoming, you're talking about 3 people. In California, you're talking about 55 people, right? So the scale of these meetings is a little different from place to place. But yeah, they'll assemble. They'll call themselves into order. State law may lay out a little bit of a process for them, but they will actually cast the official ballots for president and then for vice president. They seal these things up in an envelope and send them off to Congress.
Okay, then what happens next?
So they go to Congress, and on January 6th, there's a joint session of the new Congress. The vice president is presiding because he's president of the Senate, and he actually
new Congress. When? Sorry to interrupt. When did they get sworn in? The new Congress.
They'll be sworn in just a couple days before that.
Okay, so they're not there yet. So they get sworn in.
One of the first things they do.
Interesting. Okay, sorry. Go ahead. So new Congress. Go ahead.
Yeah, so they'll literally, they will open these envelopes, they will pull out the ballots, and the vice president will announce, 55 votes from California to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, right? I mean, they go through this whole process. There's an opportunity at that point for members of Congress to object and even potentially to debate. That has happened a couple of times recently. After 2000 and after 2004, there were some Democrats who made objections to various slates of electoral votes, and there actually was kind of a truncated debate period. But at the end of the day, these ballots are opened, the votes are read out, they're tabulated up and announced, and then it's really Congress at that point that is certifying the results of the presidential election. So, I mean, it's interesting. There's been all this debate about, when is there a president-elect and a vice president-elect, and how does that work? I mean, legally, technically, it's that January 6th date. If Congress does all that to its deadline, that's actually the point where you really have someone elected president.
Yes. Okay. So you said it's a joint session of Senate and Congress, so they're all together, or is it just the Congress doing this process?
It's both the House and the Senate. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So they're there together. Now, I've never seen this before. Obviously, it happens every 4 years. Is this a highfalutin ceremony, or how are they going to do it this year, at least?
Yeah, I mean, when Congress convenes in a joint session, there's always some pomp and circumstance, and This will be on C-SPAN, and as I say, I mean, it typically doesn't get any attention because everybody knows ahead of time, and I think that's one of the challenges that Americans have with the Electoral College process. Is typically it works so smoothly that nobody has to pay attention to all of these steps that happen after the fact. I mean, just like in other elections, right? We count the ballots on election night, and if it's not close, then everybody says, oh, candidate X won the governor's office or the Secretary of State or something like that. But of course, there's a process where there are ballots that come in late. There are provisional ballots. There are things that happen after Election Day, and there's a process for that. And there's a formal certification of the election 2 or 3 weeks later for every office. And we don't see that typically. Just like we don't see this process of the Electoral College that plays out in state capitals today and then in Congress in January.
Was there a time in our history where, we didn't know, right? Where you go to Congress and you're like, let's find out who won from all the states. We'll see. And they open the envelope and it's like a grand actual reveal.
Well, not exactly, but there have been times where it wasn't clear what was going to happen at some of these later stages in the process. At one point, a vice presidential candidate died. At another point, a presidential candidate died, but he had already lost the election. But there were questions about who the presidential electors would vote for. And most notably in 1876, there were 3 states where the Republicans said, we won, and they sent envelopes with Electoral College votes to Congress, and the Democrats also said, we won, and they sent envelopes with Electoral College votes to Congress. So in January of 1876, Congress had they had a real challenge to figure out which votes do we count, and back then, Inauguration Day actually wasn't until March. And it was just a couple days before that Congress had sorted it all out. So, that makes anything that we've seen in recent history, look pretty mild compared to the 1876, 1877 election.
So it's interesting to say, because a lot of these deadlines are in the Constitution, right? Election day is in the Constitution. And is today in the Constitution?
No, actually,
January
these
6th?
dates are set. I mean, the date that's really in the Constitution is January 20th. Other than that, Congress sets these dates. They have the power. The Constitution says that the electors all have to meet on the same day, right? So the Constitution gives this power to Congress and says, you've got to establish this timeline, and then Congress has done that in something called the Electoral Counts Act.
So none of this is really set in, at least constitutional stone, except for that thing that you said in 1876 they didn't achieve, but with the Inauguration Day.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, Inauguration Day is a hard deadline. That's a constitutional deadline. Otherwise, it's deadline set by Congress. And, after 1876, Congress that's when Congress passed this law that establishes some of these other deadlines and tries to give a little bit more shape to the process. But ultimately, it's Congress's process. I mean, Congress could convene on January 5th and change the law and say, well, we're gonna do something different when we count the votes. So, there's and the founders, they knew this. I mean, they handed this power over to the political branches of state government and state legislatures, and the political branch of the federal government, that's Congress. I mean, they recognized electing presidents is a political process. Right now, we want it to be done according to the rule of law, obviously, and those things, I think sometimes we use those things as if they're necessarily opposed to each other, and that's just not true. I mean, in 1876, nobody can go back and say for sure who won that election. I mean, it's what is very clear about that election is that it's unclear. Nobody knows. There was a lot of fraud. There was a lot of voter intimidation. Even balloting worked different ways back then. The political parties actually printed their own ballots, which creates some kind of strange scenarios where, like, one area just didn't have any Republican ballots apparently, and why was that, right? So the process it's inherently political, and Congress had to work that out, and there were some compromises involved in sorting out who they elected president in 1876, and the founders were pretty pragmatic realists when it came to things like this.
Super interesting. And I feel like they'll be having a conversation about 2020 one day, about how ridiculous this election was as well, with just ballots just flooding the system. Let's, we got like 2 minutes here. Run me through a little pipe dream scenario here of how Trump could possibly still stay in power. What would he have to do? What would Mike Pence have to do in order for that to happen?
I mean, if for President Trump to win the Electoral College, that at this point would probably take a couple of states' set of electoral votes being thrown out by Congress, or if something happened today and they didn't cast their electoral votes, right? But I think that's very unlikely. I think that the more likely scenario would be that Congress looked at I guess it would have to be a couple of states, slates of electoral votes, and said, look, we think that these are illegitimate for some reason, and so we're going to set them aside. Then the election would go to the House. The House would vote by state. And in that kind of a scenario, the Republicans would have the advantage. And so I think, that's the pipe dream, kind of out of the box scenario there would be something like that.
Okay, but again, if the state houses didn't do it, and if the Supreme Court wouldn't even hear it, I doubt Congress has the cojones to do anything like that. Okay, so what about, I've heard this stuff about Mike Pence as the president of the Senate could refuse to accept certain electors. Does he have any power to do that?
I mean, the Constitution does designate the president of the Senate, so the vice president, to open the ballots. And this was a question in 1876, actually. There's nothing new under the sun, was whether, of course, in 1876, the Democrats held the White House. Ulysses Grant was president. And so the vice president was a Republican. And the question was, could he just single-handedly, unilaterally decide these disputes? And the Republicans tended to say, a lot of the Republicans said, well, yeah, of course, our vice president, the Constitution mentions him. It doesn't really specifically say what to do, so he can just do whatever he wants. Other Republicans, and you can imagine all the Democrats, said, look, we don't think that that's how this is supposed to work. It happens in a joint session of Congress. We think that the power is in the whole body at that point. And that ultimately was what they did. So the historical precedent suggests that it really is power that Congress holds. The vice president is there to preside, but not decide any disputes over electoral votes. I think that's probably a pretty fair way to interpret what Article 2 says.
Getting into coup territory at that point, perhaps. Okay, we got to run. Trent, awesome to talk to you, man. Everyone go watch the movie Safeguard, an electoral college story. It's on Amazon. What's the website?
The website for the film is safeguard.film, or you can find us at saveourstates.com.
Yeah, just go there, saveourstates.com, and watch this movie. Trent, awesome to talk to you, brother. Appreciate you.
Good to see you, Mike.
Thanks, man. We're going to come back. We'll talk about the execution the other day and how the media is spinning this and does not want you to hear the full story. It's all coming up. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. I want to talk about the death penalty here for a minute. Two cases in particular, but my main point here is about how the media hides the truth of who these two people really were and what they really did. I had to dig quite a bit in order to find the truth here. The media won't tell you, and that's what I want to talk about here. So last week, I think it was Thursday, at the same time that Supreme Court decided not to hear the Texas case, the Supreme Court decided not to stop the execution of Brandon Bernard. So he was executed Thursday night. Now, every headline is sympathetic to Brandon Bernard. I should say here out the front, so I'm against the death penalty for reasons that we don't need to take too much time here, because I want to talk to Professor Rackaniello in a minute. We got a lot of questions about the vaccine. I'm sure we'll talk about it another day. But I'm against the vaccine because I think life in prison is way worse. So it's funny, when people hear, oh, you're anti-death penalty, you're a softie, huh? You're soft on crime. It's like, no. Sweet death can be a relief for some of these people. I want a torturous existence in a tiny, tiny cell until they die, a natural death. I find that to be way, way worse than execution. Anyway, one more side note on death penalty. Some people say you can't be pro-life, which I am, at birth, and pro-death penalty, right? So they say, oh, if you're pro-life at birth, then you have to be against the death penalty. That's not a great argument. One is an innocent baby. The other is a horrific murderer. Okay, there's a little nuance there that you can't ignore. Also, there's 650,000 babies aborted every year, and there's like 10 executions. Anyway, if you Google Brandon Bernard, all you get are sympathetic pictures like the one you just saw, and stories about how he committed this murder when he was 18. And he didn't really do anything wrong. It was the other guy who was the ringleader. And then they bring it back to Trump somehow, because they have to, right? I wonder for how many years are they going to be bringing everything back to Trump all the time, right? BBC wrote a headline, first execution of Trump's final days goes ahead. You're like, Trump has nothing to do with it. I mean, I guess he could stop it, but so could the Supreme Court have stopped it, and they didn't. CBS made the news that this is the 9th execution of the year, and there's 4 more planned until January 20th. And I'm hearing this and think, well, why have we heard nothing about the first 8 executions of this year? Did you hear anything about the other 8 that happened? But all of a sudden we're hearing about these last few. Why? The media is spinning this on Trump, right? Because listen, this is important. The media, it needs to always make Trump out to be a monster who is murdering people. It's been that way for 4 years. Now, the left could not pin Trump murdering people at the border. Never happened. Trump never rounded up and murdered the Muslims, as they said he would when he was first elected, or the gays, or the Jews. I love the accusation that Trump was anti-Semitic. That was always my favorite. Trump never murdered anyone. In fact, he ended wars that we've been fighting for decades. So they were never able to pin this on Trump. They were never able to pin murder on Trump. So now they're trying to blame Trump for murdering death row inmates. I heard the line that the Trump administration's on a killing spree. Right? Meanwhile, all these articles that have these nice, happy pictures, they never articulate what these people did. For Brandon Bernard's case, they only say that what he did was when he was 18. So let's take a couple minutes and tell you what he did. Stacy and Todd Bagley, they were Christian youth ministers, 28 years old. They were in Texas. They stopped at a gas station to use a payphone, and 2 gang members walked up to Todd and asked for a ride to their uncle's house. And he said, yeah, sure, hop in. So the 2 gang members were in the back seat. They started driving, and one of them put a gun to his head. Told to pull over. They stopped. They put the couple in the trunk of the car, and they drove around for 6 hours. Got their ATM card, withdrew money, tried to pawn off her wedding ring. And the entire time, the couple's in the back seat talking about how much God loves them. The main guy eventually opened up the trunk and shot them both in the head. He died instantly. She did not die. She lived. That guy was executed in September. He ordered Brandon Bernard to go to the gas station and get gasoline to pour on the car and light it on fire. And that's what killed Stacy. She died of smoke inhalation. And that's what Brandon Bernard did. So that when you hear people say, he didn't even pull the trigger. Yeah, he did go to the gas station, though, for the express purpose of burning these people to death. The other argument you hear, they're like, this isn't even worth too much time, but people are saying, they're like comparing him to Dylan Roof. Remember Dylan Roof? He's the one who shot and killed 9 Christians in the black church. And they'll be like, so Brandon Bernard gets killed, but Dylan Roof is still alive. You're like, what? What are you talking about? First of all, the Dylan Roof, that was only 5 years ago. It takes a long time for the death penalty to come to its completion, right? All the appeal, which Brandon Bernard lost, every single one. It took 20 years for Brandon Bernard to get the death penalty to actually be killed, right? 20 years. Dylan Roof was only a couple years ago, so like, it's like the weirdest thing. But they're doing that to make it a race thing, right? It's the dumbest comparison I've ever heard. It's not factual at all, especially because Dylan Roof's on death row, right? He was sentenced to death. So give it a few years and he'll be white, black. Here's another person the left is championing right now without telling you what he did. Alfred Bourgeois. This guy took a paternity test. Turns out that there was a 2-year-old girl who was in fact his daughter, and the court told him to pay child support. He didn't want to, so he took the girl. He was a trucker. Took the girl on the highway, tortured her the entire way, punched her in the face, whipped her with an electrical cord, burned the bottom of her foot with a cigarette lighter. Just horrific. At a truck stop, the little girl did something like knocked over her toilet or like made some like innocent little mistake, and he slammed the back of her head against the dashboard and against the window of his truck and killed her. Okay, that's not in the headline, right? You don't see male, because he's not a man, male who murdered 2-year-old daughter, smashing head into window, gets death penalty. It's not. It's Trump executes second black man in end of term killing spree. All right. So the claim of the left is he's intellectually disabled. So to the left, he's the real victim here. So listen, we're gonna make this a short segment because I want to talk to our professor coming up next. You decide if you support the death penalty or not. Again, I don't get all up in arms about people either way on it. I'm against it because I want these people to rot in prison. Rot until they're very, very old. I want them to suffer for as long as they live on this earth, and then all of eternity, of course. But whatever, you decide. My point here is how difficult it was to find any information on what these guys did. You're just supposed to feel sympathy, right? And that's the left's view, is that criminals are victims. So if you're on death row, you're like the ultimate victim, right? You're the ultimate criminal, so you're the ultimate victim. And to get you to that sympathetic point faster, they make it a race thing, which is what they do for everything. Don't fall for it. Don't fall for it. Everything's got to be race. Quick example, on the left turning everything into race. The media keeps tripping all over themselves, calling Biden's pick for Secretary of Defense Black General Lloyd Austin. I've read this like 20 times. They keep calling him Black General. Right? Black General. What is the weird? Like, they call him Black General, you call him General, and you're the bigot. Professor Vincent Racaniello coming up next. Tons of questions about the vaccine that we'll ask and we'll get answers to. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, I have more questions about the vaccine and COVID and everything today than I've had in a long, long time. So I want to go right to our friend, Professor Vincent Racaniello. He's a virology professor at Columbia University, and you have to watch his podcast, This Week in Virology, at microbe.tv. Professor, hello, sir.
Morning, Mike. How are you? Nice shirt.
What? Dude, you as well, sir. What a handsome group we have here on the TV. Vaccines on trucks today, Professor, being sent around the country. Let me just throw it to you first. I got a ton of questions, but what do you think?
It's amazing. It's less than a year since they started working on this vaccine. This is unprecedented. Never happened before. We're going to start immunizing on levels unknown in humanity. So this is really amazing. And these vaccines look good. To me, I'm way back in the line. But if you said to me today, take it, I'd take it for sure.
On Wednesday, we're going to talk to our logistics guy about the challenges logistically, because I guess it's got to be at negative 94 Fahrenheit, which is pretty wild. How do you do that on airplanes and all that stuff? So are you worried about that logistically?
I am. You know, Pfizer's going to ship out the vaccine in suitcases full of dry ice, right? And that's fine, but not everybody has dry ice because they say you have to replenish the suitcase with dry ice when it lasts a few days. Mm-hmm. Not everybody has dry ice. There are freezers that can keep that low temperature. We have them in my lab, but not everybody has them. So I'm worried about some parts of the world that don't have the ability to replenish the dry ice, don't have the freezers. It's going to warm up, and that could be a problem. So yeah, it is. I'm worried.
And my understanding, the Moderna vaccine only has to be at 24 degrees, which is better, but that's still something. Why 2 shots? So my understanding is you get 1 shot, wait 3 weeks, and then get a second shot. Why 2?
For many vaccines, we need what we call a booster, right? You get that first shot, and then your immune response starts to kick in. recognizes it, but it's not quite the amount of virus you need to make a long-lasting immune response, and so that we give a booster. And if you remember as a kid, many of the vaccines that you got, you needed a booster just to do that. And so these are no different. First shot, a couple weeks later, second shot to get the maximal protection. Now, some of the trials have shown that even after one shot, you get some protection, which is good because some people are just not going to be able to show up for their second boost. But for maximum long-lasting protection, 2 shots.
Cool. And same vaccine both times.
Should be the same vaccine both times, right?
Okay. Let's talk about the safety of it. Again, read something about Bell's palsy. What is it? What's the likelihood? Very small. And then I want to ask you the science behind it. But what's Bell's palsy?
Well, Bell's palsy is a kind of paralysis, a facial paralysis that many people develop, on their own without getting any vaccine. And it happens at a low level in the population. And we noticed it in some of the trials, but it turns out that it happened in both the vaccine and the placebo group, right? The group that doesn't get the vaccine. In fact, all these side effects, you have to really, when you look at them, you have to say, okay, they happened in the vaccine. Let's look at the placebo. And if you go through the list, and when you immunize 30, 40, 50,000 people, you're going to get things happening. In fact, there were even deaths, right? But there were car accidents. So things are going to happen. So Bell's palsy happened in the vaccine and in the placebo group at the same rate. So it's not vaccine related. It's just things that happen to people in their daily lives.
Oh, that's such a media deception. You brought up that car accident one because that was big headlines that someone in the COVID vaccine died. And then you had to read like the 5th paragraph down before you said a car accident. Or it was, I don't even think they said, but it could have been a car accident. It was someone in the placebo group and had nothing to do with the vaccine. Like, what is that?
No, I mean, there are some things that could happen by the vaccine. The most common ones are pain at the injection site, fever, muscle aches, fatigue. A lot of people get tired. General loss of appetite. Those happen a lot with the vaccine, but that's normal. That's your body making an immune response. And they go away within a week or two. But these more serious things, Bell's palsy, heart attacks, strokes, these all happen to people irrespective of whether you get a vaccine or not. It has nothing to do with the vaccine. So I'm not too worried about that.
The mRNA, the fact that this is a new means of giving a vaccine. Any concerns about that for you?
In the beginning, the only concern I actually had was whether it would work or not, whether it would protect. And the studies have shown that it protects. I'm not worried about the side effects of an mRNA vaccine at all, because what happens when you get injected with it, you get a nice immune boost right away. You get fever and muscle aches. Those are your immune system kicking in. And I can't imagine any other issue other than that happening. So I'm not worried about the side effects, even though it's a brand new vaccine. From what I've seen so far, we're 2 months in, no serious events related to the vaccine. It's all, as I said, just people's lives.
I want to be reminded of that once a week, Professor. Obviously, we'll reassess too, of course. We're very America-centric as Americans, but I'm reading about this vaccine in Russia. And I just read an article that said, like, they were talking about avoiding alcohol for a couple months or whatever. But I was like, oh, Russia vaccine. Like, do you know anything about that one?
Yeah, so Russia made a adenovirus vectored vaccine, kind of like the chimp adeno that we were talking about and a few others. Yep. So they made it quite early on, and they licensed it early on with not a lot of testing. So they got a lot of criticism for that it wasn't safe and so forth. But they're moving forward. And frankly, it's really no different from many of the other adenovirus vaccines that are being made, with the exception being you get an initial shot and you get a boost. They're 2 different adenoviruses, which is really good because that eliminates issues with you make an immune response against the adenovirus and that impinging on vaccine efficacy. So I actually like that approach. And as long as they're manufactured properly, they'll be okay with that over there.
Is the Moderna one an adenovirus or no?
Moderna is mRNA too. Moderna and Pfizer are both mRNA vaccines.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. Why did we talk about adenovirus then? Who was doing that?
So AstraZeneca is the adenovirus vaccine that's in phase. We saw that's the one where they gave half a dose by mistake to some of the people, and that actually work better than giving a full dose and a full dose.
Okay. So we're talking about these two, and then there's that third vaccine. Are there going to be more coming out, do you think? Or do you think all the people who have been working on this are like, we lost?
No. The U.S. is going to depend on 6 vaccines in all, because 350 million people, we're not going to cover that with Pfizer and Moderna. It's going to be a long time. So we need the others. And the rest of the world, 7 billion people plus, is going to need many more vaccines. So no, if you're working on vaccines now, you're not giving up because there's a market. And going forward, we're probably going to have to vaccinate for many years. So the vaccine race is not over.
Okay. Read another article about the Australian government terminates a deal to buy 51 million Queensland COVID vaccines. What's Australia's vaccine?
So I'm not sure what they're making. Not a lot of publicity. We haven't seen any of the data. A lot of these vaccines, we don't see the data. Vaccines out of China, we don't see it. But Australia has not had a lot of infections. Australia and New Zealand, they're way down there at the bottom of the world. You shut down travel and you can really catch them. So I think there's much less of an urgency to make a vaccine in those countries.
Yeah, the best way to stop COVID is to become an island. That will really stop the spread very quickly.
That's right.
Okay, I want to talk to you about any other vaccine news that you think we need to know today.
I think the key here is that everyone's going to get vaccinated first, right? So you have to be careful. But I don't see any issues with these vaccines. Now, I understand if you don't like vaccines in general, that's another issue. But I'm okay. I've been following these pretty closely. And as I said, if you gave it to me tomorrow, I'd take it. I'd give it to my whole family. I have no issues with these 2 mRNA vaccines and the AstraZeneca.
Okay. Let me ask you this. What would you need to see in order for you to be like, hold on? Like what's the line or what limit or what data would you need to see?
There are 2 things that I would see. First, if it doesn't work very well, if it's 50% efficacy, that would be really bad because half the people immunized would be at risk, right? And that's a really bad situation. But we're in the high 90s for the 2 mRNA vaccines, so I'm not worried about that. What I would see within 2 months, some side effects like Guillain-Barré, which we've mentioned before, paralysis that some vaccines cause, we haven't seen that, or some kind of vaccine-related issue that we haven't seen. So in the vaccinated population, some side effect that's way higher than the placebo. We haven't seen any of that.
Would we not have already seen those things out of the 30,000 in the trial, or are you still keeping out the potential that it could still be seen?
That's a good question. It depends on the frequency, right? If it's 1 in a million, we wouldn't see it now. And there's some vaccines, like the polio vaccine one of the polio vaccines has 1 in 1.5 million very serious side effect. And so we wouldn't see that now. So we're going to have to wait, but we're going to hit 1 million people within the next few weeks, right? We're starting to vaccinate like crazy. So we're going to know that before the end of the year for sure.
Okay. I want to talk about the cycle thresholds. I read a New York Times article the other day quoting your colleague a virologist at Columbia University, talking about how we need to be using this as a metric. Like we need to be talking about this as a country and we're not. Can you explain cycle thresholds for us?
So when you look for infection by some nucleic acid test like PCR, right? Nucleic acid, you get a nasal swab, they bring it in the lab, they extract the nucleic acid, and then they put it in a machine that amplifies it so they can detect it because coming out of your nose, it's very low. And so they do cycles of amplifying this nucleic acid, okay? And what it involves is doing an enzymatic reaction for a while and a couple of temperature shifts, and then you repeat it over and over. So the cycle, that's what a cycle is. And typically they run these assays for 40 cycles, and then they say, what do we have? Do we have some SARS-CoV-2 nucleic acid or not? The cycle threshold is the cycle where you first see the viral nucleic acid present, right? Because if it's too low, you're not going to see it for many cycles. And let's say 15 cycles you see it. The lower the cycle threshold, the more RNA you have, right? Because the more RNA, the sooner it comes up in these cycles. So cycle threshold is used to measure that CT, and it can be low. But at the end of an infection, it's typically 35 and higher, and you're really not infectious anymore at that point. So that's what my colleague is referring to. We should be using that number for sure, because if you get a test and it just, they say positive, that could be a cycle threshold of 15, which means you're infectious as anything, or it could be a cycle threshold of 35, which means you're not an issue. So we don't get those.
That's a huge deal. Now, when I
Yes.
first read this article, I was like, I made up numbers. I was like, okay, let's say out of 1,000 yes tests, maybe 10% of them are like cycle threshold 15 and whatever. I made up these numbers. But then I read the article again. I skipped over the paragraph accidentally where it said that in the couple trials they did, as many as 90% of the positive tests were on the higher cycle thresholds. So maybe not as,
Right.
what's the word, virulent or whatever. So
Yeah, we're not making infectious virus. Yeah.
wow, that's a huge deal. Now,
But here's the thing. I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
please.
You can, let's say you have a cycle threshold of 38, right? That could be, the problem is that could be you're at the end of an infection and you hardly have anything, you're just fizzing out, or you maybe at the beginning and you don't know the difference. That's the problem. So that's why you need, if you get a very low cycle threshold number, you have to have another test in a couple of days. And if it's gone, there's no more RNA, then you're at the end of your infection. And if it may go up, then you're at the beginning, okay?
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, do we know that number? Like, do the labs that do your basic test know it and just not talk about it? Or does it take a whole nother test to figure that out or something?
No, they get it. They know it when they run the test, but they don't report it because in the US anyway, the FDA approved tests they're not approved with a cycle threshold. You're not allowed to give that information. Only certain people can get it. Like when the president was infected, he got his cycle threshold, right? And actually, I got a test a couple of months ago with a cycle threshold of 37, and I knew immediately that I wasn't infectious. I went back, I had it in a couple of days, and it was 0. And that was a false positive, actually. So they don't give out the cycle thresholds in general. But I do think that we should. You could. It depends on who's doing the test, right? Some places will say, yeah, here it is. And others will say, I don't know what you're talking about, right?
Okay. Wow, interesting. Okay, we are going to talk more about that. That is something. That is something. I like that nuance, right? I like to get that detailed information. I feel like we're missing out on that.
Yes, I agree. No, it's been very carefully looked at. It's a very important issue. I agree.
Okay, any final thoughts, Professor? For the year, this is the last time we're going to chat this year. Anything else?
Yeah, we're going to talk next year. Everyone be safe, okay? Take it easy. If you have the opportunity to get the vaccine, go for it and have a safe year, and we'll talk to you next year. And in the meantime, watch the podcast, This Week in Virology.
Oh, that's right. You guys never take time off. This week on Virology, microbe.tv. Thank you, sir. We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Have a wonderful day. All right, everyone. We are going to be talking. I thought that's what cycle threshold was. Professor put it perfectly, and I was like holding off before we talked about that. But we're going to go all in on cycle threshold. That is a huge, huge deal that no one's talking about. All right, do more of it tomorrow. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word.